Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Maria Elena Durazo. I am a state senator representing District 24 in Los Angeles and chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus. The California Latino state senators and assembly members here today represent millions of Californians from all parts of the state. We are very grateful and appreciative to the reporting by Manuela Tobias from the Fresno Bee last week. As a result of her reporting, we now know that last December, during a massive COVID-19 outbreak at the Foster Farms plant in Southeast Fresno, the Fresno County health officials tipped off Foster Farms about a planned OSHA health and safety inspection. The county officials coordinated their media strategy during the crisis and intentionally withheld information from the public about the outbreak and their investigation. At least 5 people who worked at the plant died. Those 5 men and women died after losing their battle to COVID-19, and more than 20 people who also worked at the plant were hospitalized due to the COVID. So we must ask the question, whose interests were these public health officials serving? The people of Fresno County or Foster Farms, one of the largest corporations in the country that has repeatedly put the health of its workers and our communities at risk throughout the pandemic? We are outraged, and we call on the Newsom administration to initiate an investigation into the deliberate violation of giving confidential information by the Fresno County Health Department and the suspected coordination between the department and Foster Farms to intervene in the investigation by our state agency, OSHA, limit information, and downplay the seriousness of the outbreak. We expect a comprehensive investigation to restore trust in a system designed to protect the health interests of all workers and not coddle and enable corporations that value profits over people and their employees. Thank you. And now I'm proud to hand it over to our Assembly Member Robert Rivas, Vice Chair of the Latino Caucus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Always great to see you. And I want to thank everybody for being with us this morning. I'm very proud to be Vice Chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus. I represent the 30th Assembly District, also Chair of Agriculture in the State Assembly. And first off, I want to thank the Fresno Bee and the reporter, Manuela Tobias, for her work in uncovering this truly troubling event. The Latino Caucus, our members have been deeply, we've been concerned about the health and safety of our state's agricultural workers, about our essential workforce. And since the start of this pandemic, we have been advocating for, we have been working for first worker protections and now vaccines to ensure an equitable distribution of vaccines across our state to our residents and to our populations that have been hardest hit in this state. And we've been fighting for these vaccines for this group of very vulnerable essential workers who we know have experienced the greatest health and economic disparities as a result of this pandemic. And our caucus has worked very closely with our governor and his administration to mitigate the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had on Latinos across the state. And so when we hear reports about Fresno officials have, that they have broken the trust of their community and have put the lives of our essential workers in jeopardy, it's a problem. And this morning, we are here to demand answers and to demand accountability. The public, they deserve to know the truth of what exactly happened, of why it happened, and those responsible for any improper interactions with Foster Farms. They must be held accountable. As government workers, we work for people and not corporations. And so, significant some COVID-19 related laws and regulations that were adopted last session, a lot of that work from this caucus and from members of this caucus. But we, worked on laws last session to provide workers with protective equipment, with frequent testing, with workplace safety enhancements. And so, as the grandson of a farm worker, I am personally offended by the actions taken by these Fresno County health officials. These workers are multi-dimensional people. They have families, they have roots in our community. And the public, we deserve they deserve answers, and so I'd like to share my concerns and echo the statement of our chair, and ask the governor's administration to initiate an investigation into improper actions that may have led to an increase some cases of COVID-19 or even some deaths. And so with that, I want to hand it over to my colleague in the State Assembly, that is Dr. Joaquin Arambola, who's the Assembly member from Fresno.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Rivas, as well as Senator Durazo. Both as chair and vice chair of the Latino Caucus, you have provided the urgency and attention to this issue that it is needed, and really appreciate your ability to pull together this press conference and all of the attention that you've brought to it. But I feel that I must remind us that during this outbreak, that the COVID-19 pandemic was at its deadliest. And according to the Manuela Tobias story, this was the biggest known COVID-19 workplace outbreak we had in Fresno County. And it was being investigated at the Foster Farms plant on Cherry Street in Fresno. And we know that this horrible virus has disproportionately killed and affected Latinos and other ethnic minorities. And I must remind you that most of the workers at Foster Farms are people of color. And so this story does raise disturbing questions about trust. If a county public health department is more concerned about helping a business owner rather than safeguarding the health and well-being of people who work at this business, what are we to think? It raises questions about whether components of the Fresno health safety system have been compromised and possibly biased towards employers. And we need to know whether or not this is a single incident or an indication of something that is more widespread. And so I agree that an investigation is needed to help us to restore trust in this system. As a physician, I know that for you to take care of your patients, those patients must know that you are doing everything you can to help them. As elected officials, we must do the same for every constituent that we serve. They must know that their public health officials are protecting workers. I would point out in the Fresno Bee editorial, they reminded us that it is the Fresno County Department of Public Health, not the Fresno County Department of Corporate Health. We must ensure that our public health officials have both the trust and interest of all Californians, especially our most vulnerable. With that, I would now like to introduce my friend and colleague, Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez.
Thank you, Dr. Ambula. From the very beginning of this pandemic, we saw and noticed that there was a disproportionate impact on some of our essential workers, especially our Central Latino workers, in areas that were ensuring that we continue to have food. And so we intervened as a legislative branch. We intervened, in fact, as a Latino caucus to say we need the strongest protections, utilizing OSHA to ensure that these workplaces are safe. You should not have to choose between your life and bringing home a paycheck. And so we did that last year with the cooperation of the administration, ensured that there were, in fact, policies and procedures put forward that the OSHA could go in and ensure that these workers were kept in the most safe way possible. And then we hear this. And for so many of us, this is not new. We've had decades and we've heard decades. So many of us, of course, are children or grandchildren of farm workers. My father came here in the 1960s. And we always heard about coordination between the farmers, unfortunately, and at that time, the Border Patrol, La Migra, as we'd say, and a coordination that often Latino immigrants knew not to trust the government, any form of the government. And we've like to think we've changed that. We've gotten elected. We're here, and we're here to provide that type of guidance and trust for our own community. And so when something like this happens, it takes us back to that time when our community had no real voice in government, had no real voice in these protections, and knew to fear the government. We don't want that. This is inappropriate. We think it was inappropriate, and we call on the administration to do an investigation to find out if it was. And we call on everybody to realize how sensitive this is for our community that has been working to keep us all fed. It's unfair. It takes us back decades, and it doesn't allow our community to build that kind of trust we need right now for them to trust so that we can get vaccinated, so that we can get back to regular work. And we need to rebuild that trust. With that, I'm going to send it back to the other part of the state, all the way up north, or more north in San Diego, where I represent, to Senator Ana Caballero.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. Appreciate your words. You know, throughout this pandemic, we asked our essential workers to make sacrifices, many which involved really great risks. I heard repeatedly from farm workers that they were concerned about their health and they were concerned about their working condition. There was an expectation that employers would work to minimize those risks, and that they were provided, that the farm workers and essential workers would be provided with every tool necessary to do that. Unfortunately, that wasn't always the case. My office received reports that farm workers in the Kerman area were not being furnished with soap and water to wash their hands. They had no paper towels if there was water. There was no hand sanitizer, no masks were being provided, and no social distance protocols were being followed. And we were there to pass out some of these PPE and kept hearing this. And they also claimed that their employers were being tipped off as to inspection dates and times. And so, as you can imagine, no true changes were being made. That day there would be supplies, and then the following days there would not be. While I strongly believe in collaboration as a tool for change, accountability and equity is important. And throughout the pandemic, accountability has failed our most vulnerable workers. How can we expect them to trust us when we have not earned it? We need to build trust and accountability into our systems to ensure that we learn from these mistakes. We can and must do better, and my heart breaks for the tragic loss of life, but their deaths cannot be in vain. I'm here to affirm that the health and safety of workers should always be a primary goal of every health department in our state. And if we need to change the law in order to make that explicitly clear, I'm sure we can accommodate that. This is especially so when the workers are essential workers who are forced to work on pain of losing their jobs during a pandemic that is killing tens of thousands of Californians and hundreds of thousands of Americans. Any worker who is not protected deserves, at the very least, an apology, and any health department that abrogates its responsibility to working families must assure that it will never do that again. I'm here to thank and praise all essential workers who kept the rest of us fed and protected. And you know, we had no shortage of fruits and vegetables on the shelves, despite the fact that we had shortages of paper products. Those essential workers got up every morning despite their fear, and they went to work and they produced the food that we all took for granted when we went to the store. These workers are among the best that California has to offer. This includes persons who work in processing plants and farm workers who harvest our crops. Every California agency, including our public health departments, should similarly honor these essential workers and renew their commitment to keep our workforce safe and healthy. And with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Senator Lina Gonzalez, the good senator from Long Beach.
Thank you, Senator Caballero. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining today. First and foremost, want to give condolences to all of the families. We shouldn't have to continue to give condolences, but here we are. And I want to thank Assemblymember Arambula and Senator Caballero for bringing this issue forward. But the past year, I was the chair of the Senate's Special Committee on Pandemic Emergency Response. We held an oversight hearing that specifically worked at workplace health and safety issues, the role of the essential worker, which we all know is super valuable. But in that, we heard so many egregious complaints, as we're hearing now. We learned that the safeguards in place via Cal OSHA's complaints and investigations process to protect frontline workers were riddled with holes and gaps. This is why I introduced a Senate Bill 606 to give Cal OSHA, to ensure that Cal OSHA has the authority to impose additional penalties on employers for willful health and safety violations and to protect our workers who report unsafe conditions from employer retaliation. It'll provide Cal OSHA with more tools to maximize the use of limited resources and respond more effectively so we don't lose another family member. These efforts are going to be hard, but we need to do so. So as Senator Caballero mentioned, that we don't allow these families' deaths to be in vain. We need to change this now, and we need to strengthen the accountability measures to make sure our community can trust county health departments and can trust government in general. And I want to just say thank you for the Latino Caucus for bringing this forward. We have a lot of work to do, and I want to thank Bobby and Deep for being here as well. Thank you. Next, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Assembly Member from Los Angeles, Wendy Carrillo.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Wendy Carrillo, and I have the honor and privilege of representing the 51st Assembly District, which includes the communities of Northeast LA and East Los Angeles, and I serve as chair of the Assembly's Budget Subcommittee 4 on State Administration. In this latter role is where the legislature is charged with ensuring transparency, accountability, and independence amongst agencies whose mission is to ensure the well-being and dignity of working people. Cal OSHA's job is to keep California safe and healthy, no matter who they are or where they work. There is something to be said about the collaborative as opposed to heavy-handed approach in working with employers to implement best practices to protect employees, especially since regulatory agencies like Cal OSHA have been stretched thin during the pandemic. That said, sitting back and trusting that employers are always going to do what's best when evidence emerges that suggests that they are breaking the law and proactively hiding COVID-19 positive cases and exposures and spread is completely unacceptable. It goes without saying that the recent reporting of Cal OSHA in providing advance notice to foster farms on what was meant to be a surprise inspection of a site with 22 confirmed COVID-19 cases is egregious, needs to be investigated, and if found to be true and accurate, must have consequences. If Cal OSHA doesn't do what it is supposed to do, and more workers get COVID as a result, then more Californians fall on hard times as their breadwinners fall ill, and more families will experience heartache, including most of whom are communities of color, as their loved ones continue to suffer. Low-wage immigrant workers of colors, like the ones at foster farms, were more likely to face poor health conditions and outcomes and experience workplace injuries and fall victims to occupational fatalities because of the pandemic. During the global pandemic, these same workers have been disproportionately impacted in horrific and irreversible ways. Latinos have the greatest share of death in ages under 54, for instance. Almost half, 48.9% of deaths are ages 35 to 44 and have been Latino. The horror of the COVID-19 snatching up young and working age adults became vivid early in the pandemic, precisely because meat plant workers, farm workers, grocery store workers, and other industries where a predominance of Latino essential workers became ill and died. California owes these families everything. Stopping the spread of COVID-19 is a matter of life and death that I take personally. I am a formerly undocumented young person in this country. Both of my parents are essential workers. I worry about their safety every day, just like I worry about the safety of our hardworking, low-income, essential frontline workers and their families that have been disproportionately impacted across the state and in my district. My family has been impacted by COVID-19. Everyone's life has been changed by this virus. Too many lives have been lost. There isn't a single person in this state who is not counting on Cal OSHA to have the interest of health and safety of workers, not corporations. We are going to make sure that they live up to that expectation. And now I'd like to introduce Assemblymember Ash Kalra from San Jose, Chair of the Assembly Labor Committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Carrillo, and it's an honor to be here. I'm here on behalf of the API caucus representing our chair, Senator Pan, and I want to thank Assemblymember Joaquin Arambula, who reached out earlier in the week to ensure that we were aware of what was happening and that we had the opportunity to stand in solidarity with our Latino caucus and our Latino brothers and sisters who have been suffering inordinately through this pandemic. And in this case, the tragedy of what happened at this foster farms plant and what has clearly been not just a breakdown of government, but what seems to be a system that allows for corruption, that undermines the workers that we deem as essential. Being in San Jose, I have seen firsthand, about half the population of our city is Latino, and I've seen firsthand that it's the Latino community that's been suffering by far the most through this COVID crisis. They're the ones that are allowing Silicon Valley to run. They're the ones that are allowing us to stay home. However, we are not disconnected from those that are working in our agricultural communities. In fact, we are also allowed to survive and thrive because of those working in our farms and our food processing plants. The API caucus did send a letter to the governor, following up the letter from the Latino caucus in solidarity and in demanding an investigation. However, this is not simply just a call for solidarity, because the reality is that Asian Americans are also suffering and have suffered because of the lapse in protecting our workers at foster farms and other food processing plants and in the agricultural community. As noted from a letter that was penned by the Jakarta Movement and Hmong Innovating Politics, it notes very clearly that in the Central Valley, there are thousands of workers in these industries, in food and meat processing factories, as agricultural workers that are South Asian, Southeast Asian, Filipino, and following the Latino community, Punjabi, Sikhs, and the Hmong community represent the largest number of workers. And overwhelmingly, these are monolingual immigrant women. And so I want to highlight those notes from that letter, because the reality is that we are all suffering. And as Dr. Arambula mentioned, these are people of color, these are immigrants, these are women, these are people that depend on us to stand up for them. They depend on us to have, not just to have their back, but to fight for them. And this is our opportunity to continue to do so. When I look at the colleagues on this Zoom, you have been fighting well beyond the past year, but certainly during this pandemic for our workers. And I'm so grateful, Latino Caucus. I'm so grateful to Chair Durazo and Vice Chair Rivas for leading the charge over the past several months. And today, we must stand together on behalf of these workers. I also want to thank Deep Singh for being here, who's also been a very loud voice on behalf of the South Asian community, in particular, the Punjabi Sikhs that are suffering both in terms of the high COVID rates in the agriculture community and these food processing plants. So thank you all for allowing the API caucus to stand with you. And we are going to be with you every step of the way until an investigation is done and results from that investigation are seen. Thank you.
Maybe Assembly Member Rambula, would you like to introduce family members?
I will begin, if I can, by introducing Deep Singh with the Jakarta movement. I have known Deep for a while, and I really admire his advocacy and his passion to stand up for our communities, and wanted to be able to give him a platform. So if I can, first Deep Singh, and if you can introduce Bobby, Deep.
Sure. Thank you, Assemblymember Arambula. Good morning, buenos dias, sat sri akal. My name is Nandeep Singh, and I'm the Executive Director of the Jakarta Movement, a statewide organization that works in the Punjabi Sikh community in 15 counties across the state. Since March of last year, our organization has been sounding the bells in the depths of the Central Valley to anyone that would listen about our deep concerns about the lack of regard and prioritization of the safety of poultry and meat plant workers, particularly at foster farms. From outbreaks in Merced and Fresno, we've been on the ground speaking to workers, hugging families that lost their loved ones, and helping provide resources to those in need. However, the toll has been horrible. In industries that were given veneers of immunity by the previous administration, corporate actors have consistently put profits over people. As one Punjabi worker at foster farms in Livingston shared with me, they call us essential, but we're treated as if we're expendable. In the Central Valley, we have so many meat and poultry plant workers where the majority, as Assemblymember Kalra shared, are monolingual Spanish, Punjabi, and Hmong women. There are aunties, there are tias, there are puas, there are mothers that work numerous hours to provide for their families and give their children greater opportunities. With vaccinations coming, we have a path forward. However, if we hold faith in justice and accountability, then we must understand the human decisions that led to the callous disregard of lives like Bobby's father, Sang's mother, Harpreet's mother, and so many others that have shared their stories with us. We must understand what happened in Fresno and places across the state We must also look at our public agencies, OSHA, and our county public health departments that are paid for by the public and are to serve and protect the public. If that much is clear, then is their charge to protect communities or corporations? We call on the governor of California to stand boldly and firmly with the people of California. He has made equity a central part of the conversation. In this transformational moment where we can address inequities, whether that be the criminalization of Black bodies, the disregard for Latinx bodies that have essentially continued to move the state, and the violence against Asian bodies at their workplaces that extract labor without a responsibility towards their health and well-being. We can do better. We must do better. And we start by calling for a thorough investigation of what happened in Fresno County. I just want to thank, really, and I see in terms of even our guests with us, the importance of local journalists and journalism. It's been people like Manuel Tobias, Alex Hall, who have tenaciously covered this story from the start. I want to thank the Latino Caucus, of course, the chair, the vice chair, and of course, Assemblyman Dr. Arambula, the API Caucus, and in particular, Assemblymember Ash Kalra, and others that just continue to center people, families, and community. And finally, and most importantly, I just want to thank the workers and their families that have invited us into their homes, share their stories, and continue just to move the state in the ways we go. Next, I want to share with you, I want to introduce person that I've had sort of long sort of peripheral connections, but it's actually been in tragedy where I've got to know him best. Bobby Singtolo, he's been a lifelong resident here in Fresno County. His parents have both actually long worked at Foster Farms. He tragically lost his father during this most recent outbreak at Cherry. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Bobby, and appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I just want to say a few words about my father and the whole incident that happened this past December. My father, Baljinder Singh Dillon, was an amazing father who worked hard to provide for his family. He worked tirelessly since 1979, working 70+ hours a week for the past 4 decades. 25 of those 41 years he spent at Foster Farms. He was dedicated to his job and his duties at Foster Farm. He had plans to retire at the end of December of 2020 and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Unfortunately, he contracted COVID virus from Foster Farms in early December, and his battle with COVID lasted 22 days, and it took his life. Recently, the Fresno Bee reported the story of Fresno County health officials and Foster Farm having ties and providing advance notice of inspections. After reading this story, we felt that both Foster Farms and Fresno County are not being transparent about the severity and scale of this outbreak. We already have paid the ultimate price of losing our father, but there should be accountability from Foster Farms as if they have failed their workers by not providing a safe work environment. We humbly request that these ties between health officials and employers be investigated. The truth of the outbreak needs to be revealed for the sake of getting closure. And I thank you all for being involved and getting us the closure that we really, really need. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you very much. And I must imagine how difficult it must be for you to remind yourself of the pain that you're going through. So we all very much appreciate you being here with us. I think we're gonna move on. Julio, or someone going to manage any?
Yeah, Michael.
Or Michael.
Hi, everybody. I haven't received any questions from press as of yet. To anyone who is attending and would like to ask a question of the panelists, please raise your hand now.
Okay. If there's none, then I would just like to thank everyone for being here.
Sorry, Senator. We do have a reporter who's raised his hand. Juan Esparza.
Yes, can you hear me, Senator?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Lubera.
Yes, this is Juan Esparza Luera with Vida del Valle newspaper in Fresno. I have a simple question. Has a letter been sent to the governor? If so, can we get a copy, or is one being crafted right now?
Yes, a letter from the Latino Caucus, and as Assemblymember Cholera also mentioned, I believe from the API Caucus. And I think there are other letters that are also going, but we can absolutely get you a copy of both of those letters. I believe asking for the same thing, which is a thorough, strong investigation.
Thank you.
Juan, if you could drop your email into the chat, I'll send you that letter after this meeting. Thaddeus Miller has a question.
Yes, this is Thaddeus Miller of the Fresno Bee. This is for Dr.
Uh-oh, did we just lose you?
Can you hear me again?
Okay, go ahead now.
So how does the Fresno County Board of Supervisors play into this, or what would you want? What would you like to hear or see from them?
Sorry, I feel like I may have missed the context of your question. It got cut off. I did hear the tail end. Can you repeat the question if that's okay?
Sure. How does the Fresno County Board of Supervisors play into what you're asking for, and what has happened with foster farms, and what do you want to see from them or hear from them?
At the moment, we're seeking an inspection and more transparency. I think we're trying to understand what's transpired and who knew what when. I think it's important for us to look at the process and systems that were in place and evaluate whether or not changes need to be made. But first, we must uncover exactly what happened, and that's what we're asking for right now.
If I could just add to that, I believe obviously whatever the investigation uncovers, we would proceed from there to take whatever other steps, if there was who was responsible for this, and that actions be taken for those who are responsible. So I believe once the investigation, then we could push forward on what else we expect, both from Fresno County and Cal OSHA and from this administration. Michael, any more questions?
Jocelyn?
Hi, yeah, this is Jocelyn with the CBS 47. I was just wondering if you've had the chance to reach out to the Fresno County Health Department and if you've received any answers from them when it comes to this at all.
I'm happy to comment on that and share that I've been working alongside our Latino caucus to work on this letter as we are asking for an investigation. This week, we are happy to make sure we touch bases with the Fresno County Department of Public Health to ask directly about what occurred, but really believe this is transparency. I thought Deep Singh said it well when he said these are public dollars and we have questions that the public deserves to know, and that's what we're asking for with this inspection.
And as state legislators, I believe it was our responsibility to reach out to the administration, and especially because there was involvement of a state agency, Cal OSHA. That's the level at which we are asking for the investigation.
That appears to be all the questions that we have from the press.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Won't be the last. We're going to keep on expecting